say not to do ever.
Oh, don't say sprint zero. Oh, come on.
Slice
Yeah.
zero. Call it slice zero.
Event zero.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Let's see if we actually get a link. Oh yeah, we do have a link, so someone can take a look and see if we're live. But yeah, very cool. Episode 0. I am going to just tweet so people can watch, and then we'll move it to the proper channel tomorrow. And the actual podcast is going to be repeating on Mondays. So the recordings will be done 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for 1 or 2 hours, depending on how much we have to discuss on Mondays. And it'll be live, so you can see the live stream. Then it'll be edited down for content and brevity to be an actual episode. I'm not going to remove my ums and ahs though. Just boring waiting for people in the chat and all that kind of stuff, like at the beginning. Cut away like the first 20 minutes of people gathering around, and then you kind of lingering talks. So anyway, cool, Matt. It's very nice outside. You're making everyone jealous because we've had nothing but rain for a long time, and instead of being in the basement recording, I'd like to be outside, but
Oh yeah. Well, I've been in my basement too, so I'm glad to get out and enjoy one day of sun anyway.
and get some vitamin D.
I tried to go for a walk this morning at a path near the Fraser River, and I don't know if it was because of the wind or just the rain over the last few days, but it was all flooded out, so I had to cancel that. Yeah.
I guess the leaves have clogged up drain pipes and sewer entrances and all that stuff.
Surprised people still have roofs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. So anyway, continue on with Axon. We kind of touched on Axon, and
Yeah, it was. To start up for our project at Savon, it was an inventory management project that was meant to replace a more batch-based system. So the original system called the Perpetual Inventory Manager basically was a series of ETL jobs that put data in a database, and then a processor ran against it, ran a bunch of queries and updated the inventory for products across all stores in Western Canada. It was kind of slow, and it was current state. So you really, if you needed to fix an inventory problem, you had to do it manually, and you had to call the store. Literally had to check the number on the those handheld devices they use in supermarkets to scan items and order items and things like that. They would manually, they'd go into the aisle, count the item, and then put the real number in, and that actually sent a message via an API to the inventory manager, and then it would just get updated. So it would invalidate the inventory manager's job of calculating inventory based on orders and based on everything else that pumped into the system, because oftentimes it was just wrong. And there was no way to fix it. So a lot of the business logic didn't quite work as well. So there was a great opportunity to let's fix this thing. It's not the technology we want to use. It's not how it should be done anyways. It's a real time inventory management's real time. It happens in real time, kind of like everything. But in this case, especially so, because you're having a lot of events that change the state over the course of a day. Often enough, you'd want a more real-time system. Lends itself quite well to event-driven. So we decided to do event-driven, but how do we want to do it? And so we had a lot of meetings, and I think it was my team lead who stumbled on Greg Young, and stumbled on you, Adam, and stumbled on people who were proponents for these patterns, CQRS, event sourcing, and domain-driven design. Nobody knew how to do it. That's okay. A couple of us learned, me and my team lead, another guy named Tim, and then it was up to us to train the rest of the team. I'll tell you, that was no easy task. Training a team on CQRS, event sourcing, and DDD from nothing.
Years.
Especially, and the more seniors, one in particular I'll never forget, who kind of scoffed and rolled his eyes every time I started a training session and brought the topic up. There's some people, they don't want to bend. right? Their paycheck, or I don't know if you want to say it like this harshly, but
Yeah.
what they've been doing up until this point kind of depends on staying the same. So pushing a more innovative approach like what we were doing, it was difficult. It was able to get done. We got everyone, herded all the cats. And then it was time to choose a technology. We kind of had a design. We had a bunch of meetings where we kind of just laid out the process, very similar to event modeling. It was a very natural process. And then we decided on, we didn't want to build our own stack. We just didn't have, there was a bunch of support. There was other issues. I mean, the inventory management group was responsible for a lot of things. So we decided on something off the shelf, and that's what led to Axon being used. And Save On Foods, the company I'm referring to, is enterprise. It's enterprise Java, it's Oracle, it's ERPs, it's integration technologies like Informatica, and master data management. So we needed something a bit beefier as part of the proof of concept. And Axon fit that mold. It worked with Java Enterprise and a lot of the modules that, like Spring that go with it. So like Spring automation in Axon, like you can just use annotations and just, preload everything, all your beans. So, but yeah, we had a working proof of concept. And then the business kind of lost interest as the other parts of this business transformation took over. There was less interest on trying to put more resources into inventory management. They just wanted to buy ERPs. They didn't want to really invest in coding. So we didn't get the project off the ground. But to bring this back to Axon, Axon worked very well. There wasn't a lot of problems with it. Like we didn't find any major bugs. It wasn't like a command bus just didn't work, right? It wasn't like when you posted to a read model, there was something corrupt. Everything kind of just floated. It was I would say we had very little problem using Axon to get off the ground. In fact, the part that was the hardest was actually integrating it with all the enterprise stuff, all the extras that make an enterprise JBoss solution work. So, I mean, that's my take on it. I found it to be the actual CQRS DDD, the aggregates, linking everything up, wiring everything up. That part was the simple part. Making it work with all the rest of the stuff, that part was a little bit harder. But in the end, we had a working proof of concept. It worked quite well.
I had a couple questions. Was that the core domain of that business, inventory control management?
The core domain of a grocery or anything, I guess, that deals with retail is the item. So I wouldn't say it was core. It's core because you need to know how much stuff you have on hand. But your core domain is the thing you're selling, in my opinion. It's the item. And actually, they put a lot of focus on that. That's part of the reason why the project didn't continue. It was first put on hold and then it was canceled because they focused on master data management and item management and supply chain. The core, I would say it's those three things for retail in general and for Save On Foods, for that company. Those supply chain was the big one, the master data management project, and definitely part of those two projects was item management, the thing you're actually selling. So it's all revolved around item information, item attribution, item categorization, all that stuff that really isn't involved with inventory, counting things. So no, it wasn't core.
Yeah, this is something I've seen with our customers all the time. Like when it comes to event source systems, and event-based architectures in general, like when we bring up domain-driven design, well, what is actually your core domain, right? What's your secret sauce? What's making you be the best one in the market, in your vertical market, right? To be able to identify, sometimes it's very hard. Even when people have been in the business for years, they're still sometimes clouded with what is actually our secret sauce that we're doing here in a large enterprise, right? Because you have many organizations within a large enterprise typically. And so context mapping usually has helped bringing some sort of organization in identifying, is DDD worth it in domains that are actually not a core domain, which we shouldn't do, right? Typically, because it is more effort. And the other question I had to you was, how did you prevent the thieves to properly check out your inventory control management, like Rick Young was saying, right?
Oh, that was our biggest problem. I have an answer. The truth is we didn't. We had somebody on our team looking at an algorithm kind of like machine learning. He had a master's of math from UBC, and it's called shrink, unknown shrink. Somebody steals something from your store, and you don't know about it till like a month later, but your count's off by 1, right? In the interim. So so it's really hard to account for. It really screws up inventory totals, and there's no easy solution. I mean, that's why there's a lot of manual counting, because there's a lot of theft. There's a lot of bad people that want to steal food, and unfortunately, there's no real easy way. I mean, you can look at trends over time, and that's what this guy was doing. He was basically designing his own machine learning algorithm to like a kind of a feedback loop, like a PID servo, where you get to the right answer eventually. You can use calculus to do that, I believe. And but that, I mean, that's really complicated, and it didn't actually get finished. To answer your question, we didn't solve the problem, but if you can solve that problem, you will make a lot of money.
Yeah, the other thing that we always talk about is, you know, like Justin kind of talked about this, or Blarg, as it's called here. He alluded to the fact that we have a lot to learn, like needing to have a whole bunch of training sessions just so everyone understands CQRS, everyone understands event sourcing, everyone understands messaging, and everyone understands domain-driven design. You know, someone commented that the domain-driven design book is like a university textbook. It's thick. It's a large one, right? Was that you, Rob, that was talking about it?
Yeah, that was me. Yeah. Basically, I think the blue book is easily 2 semesters of university level material. Easily. If you look at it, and which is fine, but then I mean, you've also got the orange summary that goes along with it. The thing though that I've learned the most about putting together a CQRS system is that it's not that hard, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, if I was working with another enterprise, I don't think I would say, well, why go with Axon IQ? Why not build it yourself? This is really one of those cases. Actually, it was Eric who told me this years ago. You know, you buy to sort of remain at consistent with your competitors, but you build for market advantage.
Yeah,
And
you buy for parity.
Pardon me?
You buy for parity.
Yeah, you buy for parity and you build for market advantage. And building your own CQRS system is actually not that tough, especially if you've attended our workshops, right? You can.
But I mean, I think what you're getting at is that there's goals of domain-driven design, and then there's the mechanics of domain-driven design, and you know, domain-driven design may be one of many ways to get that level of organization and focus.
Yeah, I mean, I've already heard, like we just started, and I've already heard a couple of people say that businesses lose faith quickly, and that's a problem in any sort of architecture you're trying to get going.
Well, they go by quarters, right? Quarterly reports. If they can't
Yeah.
tie improvement between this quarter and the next quarter, that's all the CFO cares about, really. He wants to tie those things as closely as possible. And so investments that are going to span multiple quarters need to be highly vetted. And if it's something that's subjective, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is something that Vaughn Vernon touched on the last time we spoke to him, which is you have to basically go back to the business and say, how do you view software? Is software a cost, or is software a potential profit center for your business? And it really, if they say the latter, which most enterprises think how they use software, you kind of have to hold them to that. And
that's a good point, Rob. Save on Foods is not a software shop, and they did not want to invest in writing lines of code. That affected our decisions a huge amount. Whereas if you're actually working for a company that their product is software, not grocery items, you have a far greater chance of getting an approval for a budget that meets your needs to build it exactly what you want and how you want it. we faced that challenge a lot. You know, it constrained our decision making. I mean, among other things as well. But I like that point. It depends on what it depends on what you do. You know, is your focus technology or is your focus brick and mortar, for example?
Yeah, and I've seen even companies who refer to themselves as technology companies say, you know, treat software development like a cost. So once something's up and running, that's it. Don't touch it. Like, we're just going to market the heck out of this and hope for the best. And if this product doesn't really take off or proves to be unstable, we'll start giving it away, sort of a loss leader, and build something else. So that's really not looking at, again, that's just another example of a business treating software as a cost rather than the potential profit center.
I've seen somewhat of a different direction in the last few years where corporations, typically IT departments, were considered cost, right? Cost operations, cost factors. And nowadays, software being developed is really a business enabler versus, you know, like in the traditional sense where you just was a cost center to do some sort of business tasks. But now I see businesses coming to technology saying, well, what could you do here? What could you allow us to be enabled using certain technology to maybe perhaps discover new market opportunities, right? And so I think even corporations who are not in the business of creating software can really take advantage of technology in the way we develop software for them.
This is why I continually say that it's not about software. I kind of don't want to talk about programming. I want to talk about systems automation, right? We're still dealing with information systems, no matter what your company is doing.
Right.
It's managed by managing information. Some of that may be manual. Some of that may be in a Excel spreadsheet. Some of it might be in a script that you wrote. Some of it might be in an app that your company owns and is in the App Store and the Play Store. And they all have to play together. So I think it's a little bit simplistic to look at domain-driven design and being able to organize information systems as just a software thing. Obviously, this is why we have event modeling and we look at it from the information perspective purely. But you know, not to derail the conversation from DDD and CKRS specifically, I think we can find parallels of those concepts, especially CKRS and event sourcing in the way the real world works. And I kind of make the bet that we have every system is CKRS and event sourcing, except we have really nasty shortcuts that we take, such as let's just use one read model for the whole thing. And let's just skip the event sourcing part and update the entire projection directly and throw away the events. So these are really haphazard, quote unquote, optimizations or shortcuts in what truly we think about when we think of using a system. If I was to engage with your company to book a vacation, in my head, I have a series of events that I've done. I first of all opened up an account, or I first looked at your website and opened up an account. I put in some information in it. I browsed some offerings. I picked some different things for where I'm going to travel. And then I paid for it, and I expected some notifications, and I expected some emails of receipts of, how I'm going to have my vacation. And then I will also, at the end of it, probably give a rating to how my experience was. And I may come back next year to book another vacation with you. To me, that's a stream of events. So naturally, human beings think of it. When I talk about, my experience with Uber, I can tell you about certain events, certain trips, some good things, some bad things. Some of those events are less important that I don't care to remember that well. But if pressured within the last 2 months, I could probably give you some details. But then it sort of gets put into my mental cold storage. So we have our own event sourcing anyway as human beings and as society and as we organize these things. So even though we're used to these hard rules about the technical tools that we use, such as you have a table, that's the only way you can do things. You do an update statement, the old data goes away. The only way that the history exists is in some offline mode that's a backup. That's not very much in tune with the way humans work. And so that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's good.
There were things I wish I had have known when we were starting this project. I mean, our focus, we were all devs. Our focus was purely technology. We were going in the right direction. Obviously, we seeked out the right patterns, but at the same time, we weren't business focused enough. We didn't start with the business. We didn't start with the natural flow of events. We had meetings that were like that, but they were largely focused on modules inside our code that didn't allow us to really see the big picture. What event modeling does is allow you to see the big picture, and it can connect your business to where your business wants to go, to how you want to build it. And then after that, you can, technology kind of becomes an afterthought because you have a holistic sense of exactly what it is you need to do from the get-go. And we didn't do that. That's probably part of the reason we failed too. So.
So one of the interesting things about thinking about information like that, fine, you can say all that, Adam, and talk about how information is really just the basis of everything we do here. But let's actually dog food that. And recently I tweeted about how we're doing event modeling to plan our entire year for our company. And so we have a swim lane for events that are financial, so that you have a way to trace where money actually is going to come from. We have swim lanes we haven't added yet for the actors. So, guys that are the consultants, like Justin and the other guys here, what their events are for either giving instruction on a course, during a course or a workshop, or, some of our new branches of the business coming in, such as the labs component, or the venture capital sources, where we can have proper sweat equity and have the Y Combinator functionality allow companies that are using a similar approach to show investors that this group of companies has an advantage because they treat their information systems with much more careful accountability like patterns. So that's another thing we can show. We can show those new channels of revenue actually working together with what we would like to see. So that whole event model is a way of showing event sourcing of what we would like those events to be during the whole year. Show that the reports are increasing in terms of the revenue that we're getting. We show that the costs are not, climbing at the same rate. We're showing the places where we can integrate with others. Some of the venture companies that will, look at those different startups that want to come in or different projects. Where are the integration points, not just in terms of our API, whether that's a digital API or actual contracts for doing business with another company. We can show those on a timeline and work towards exactly how the company will operate. Some of those will be literally automated pieces of the system. Maybe the amount of slices that we're doing for each of these different projects in software is shown on there. And so I think it helped. I mean, I don't know, maybe the guys can kind of give some feedback as to what they liked about the using event modeling directly for exposing the business as a set of events and a set of projections as you would in CQRS. Does that actually make sense for planning, your operations to reach your goals for a company?
I thought it worked rather well, especially when we were going over the events that occurred last year.
As a retrospective, right?
A retrospective, and using the read model sticky as like actual values that are kind of accumulated over the last year, and for predictions and goals for this year. I think it worked quite well. Yeah, especially since it's kind of like that storytelling that it applies to building software or designing your software, but also can apply to how you're planning your your business, or I was mentioning, you can even plan the household chores if you stick to these this event.
How it differed from a spreadsheet. I mean, when we're talking about planning of the year being done through event modeling, which as opposed to a spreadsheet, when you just list a bunch of things, you don't really get a sense while you're in the meeting or while you're doing it, what's connected to what. I mean, you talk about it, but then it's kind of out of your head about an hour later, and some of that information goes missing. In an event model, you have all the connections, you have the context as to why things over time are happening in that order and produce this value. And you can see time and time again, without having to remember, why it is we're doing this and what it's related to. I have found planning sessions in the past to lack that kind of context. So you really only understand the part that you're involved with. You don't really get a holistic. It's a lot like event modeling anything else. You see the whole story. You see it over time. And for me, it's just it's a lot easier to see how, let's say I have a part, or Steve has a part, or Tim or Rob or Eric. They kind of know how their part impacts the rest of the plan. And if we're all working together, then that makes it a lot easier to kind of interconnect and communicate and kind of know in advance what needs to happen next. So in my opinion, again, it's just a natural thing to do. You're using events, cause and effect. Think about the physics of it. Everything is cause and effect. Everything's an event. So there's no reason why you can't do anything with an event model. But in this particular case, when you're underpinning your year and underpinning it with an event model, you're likely going to have more success because you know how things relate to each other. It's a little easier to see. Context is just right there.
Yeah, we've gone halfway through it. So I think we kind of nailed the retrospective in terms of events and some of the projections. And we also nailed the upcoming 3 months of the new year. We have to finish that for the rest of the year in our second half. We didn't want to have an online events and virtual events are kind of tiring. You're kind of sitting there. It's different than having a true offsite that you go away to an island as we usually do and spend the entire day planning. But so we split it into 2 halves, and in the second half, we want to finish the goals for the year, but at the same time, have the actual swim lanes for the actors at the top. So as to what screens and their states do people see at the different times of the year that we can measure things against, such as from the financial perspective, we can see that the sales report every quarter shows this. That's a really big goal that might encompass quite a lot of different revenue streams, but the lines, it's a read model, the lines go back to specific events. So we can trace back exactly how we're going to reach those goals, on whatever time fragment we feel is good. It might be monthly, it might be every quarter, whatever it may be for your company, that's fine, but you're being quite transparent about it. And why is that important? That's important from me as a business owner to understand that we have a viable business, that we have an accountability for where the revenue is coming from. We have a transparent representation of how people are getting compensated and how that makes up our costs. Do we have a sufficient profit margin to continue? And be very, very transparent about that. And then, of course, part of the roles of everyone else maybe for some of the partners and some of the ventures, when do we get a new company that wants to go ahead and use their project for a learning, what's it called? Code camp replacement, right? So we're doing a code camp replacement where people can actually learn CQRS, event sourcing, event modeling, all of those concepts on a real project. Code camps usually have a project that's a made-up project because no one's going to trust a student that's in a boot camp that's just started to start writing their production code. But with the slice approach, we can do that. We de-risk that. We have a very good way of showing that the state transitions are correct and that the SLAs are adhered to. So we can show on that when those companies come in, who's taken the course, and then drill further down into those projects with same event models. These junior people, what are they learning on? Is this person just writing, their login screen because they don't feel very confident with the rest of the stuff? Are they copying, pasting the previous slices properly and changing the data in them properly? We can drill into that. So it's kind of interesting to show how in your revenue models and your finance, what your CFO is interested in, how that ties back to each channel of that activity things go. And then further, you can drill into how the actual activities within that channel contribute to giving value and when compensation is exchanged and all those things. So and how it actually works with something like the Y Combinator model, which was suggested by one of our partner companies in Poland, which is going to work out really well because it takes out the guesswork on your company valuation. And also the slices allow better estimates. So it plays well with investors that want to see, what they actually get for a lump, an X amount of money of what they put in. And that some of those conditions are now more easily marked, such as they met the SLAs, the state transitions are correct, and the work is guaranteed in case there is anything that comes up later as a bug, that those things don't incur, either large time commitments to fix or any additional monies to fix. So it's really fun to see all of that connect, and I think event modeling allows, for the first time in my career, I mean, we tried value stream mapping and all sorts of things in other companies. It was just a mess. There's no real guidance. But when you can start to put the actors involved in your company, such as the consultants, or whether they're acting as teachers or instructors at the time, or whether they're acting as business development centers because they're using their referrals to bring business in, you can see in the top swim lanes exactly what those screens are. And it may be an email. That's an example. It's like, hey, Brad, here's an introduction to Tim. They have a potential project, and Tim can then have another email as an example in the top row. And he says, yeah, come by and we'll do a session with you. And you can put all those things as events down below, but at the top, you're putting down what each person sees, which is really making it accessible to someone that's like, I don't know what value stream mapping is, or I don't know anything about finance, but I actually know what I have to do this year. I have to have these emails showing, referrals and bringing business in. So it's the top part of the event model allows your planning for the business to be more accessible, to just see how you're going to measure those things and really answer it again, as I say in these meetups, answer for the visual people that are visual. Sometimes the wall of stickies is overwhelming for people that are more visual, and so we need the example screens for people to feel comfortable with what's being asked of them. So I don't know if that's going to be how that's going to go. That's still going to happen on our second half of our town hall, and we'll certainly have a retrospective on that on Monday. By the way, the podcast is going to be Mondays. We did this one as an episode 0 just to get things set up. We had a issue with the proper YouTube channel not being ready because of the 24-hour minimum activity kind of prerequisites. So I guess people they don't trust people to put in good content right away, so they don't want people to be spamming or something like that, and just every minute start a new channel to be able to stream. So for the next one, we'll have a proper the proper channel being used. So anyway, anything else you guys want to kind of add about that activity that we had for the town hall meeting? And like, if you were starting your own company, or if you're doing your household chores, Steve, how you would, organize that, especially with the top part of where you put the actors in and not just look at the information underneath, but, who's seeing what screen, what people are pressing, what buttons or doing what actions.
Well, I guess in terms of planning your household chores, there wouldn't be very many screens. But events, like for example, I don't know, Grinder can get. They've got the battery-powered vacuum cleaner, so vacuum cleaner charged.
Right.
Started. something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess you can be kind of what's the word for it? You can be a micromanager as well, but I think the nice thing is you can focus on final events, and if you're not a micromanager, you won't specify all the finite events, and you trust that, hey, Steve knows how to operate a vacuum cleaner, so when it says room cleaned and vacuum charged, we have faith that we don't need to explain, that Steve actually put the vacuum cleaner on the charging thing, at least a few hours before the next round of cleaning. So it's an analogy to what you would do in your business.
You might want to get that detailed though, if you want an informationally complete chart of whatever you're planning, I guess.
Well, it's a lot of work to be information complete. So you want to do it where it matters, right? And I guess that's where if your system is a trading system or something, you do want to do that. Or if you're just teaching someone how to use the new vacuum cleaner, you might want to do that level of detail. But this actually happens quite a bit, and why people, these types of approaches are really good, and they kind of are lost on the C-level suite of business owners, where they just want to sit around a table and brainstorm and talk about ad hoc drawings on a whiteboard. But what we have is, because a full event sourced and event model that has information completeness can be quite detailed, and they don't have time for that detail. So this is one of the previous episodes that we had, is that we pull key frames out of a complete event model and just talk about that. And one of those ways was kind of how we replaced Wardley mapping with a high level event model, and use the streams to show the maturity of a particular approach, whether it was in initial stages or whether it was a commodity like email.
We found that with a previous. Sorry, Adam.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the previous client, where we had gone to such extreme granularity that you could see the exact from the screen, the value on the screen, through the event, the commands, and through how it flowed to the read model and on to the next subsequent screens. And they actually wanted to step back from that level of detail to have something more high level, because the C-levels wouldn't look at that granularity.
Information overload.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want to. I mean, it's not even useful at that point, because like that level of detail just is too much for someone to understand. At that level, it is the strategy, whether you are, that has to have important enough anchors in the real system, and those anchors also have to be an indication of how expensive or time consuming something's going to be, because you need that level to make it real for the C-level people, but you can't go into all the reasons for why it's expensive. So you need a way to map that. And one of the, we talked with Bobby Calderwood quite a bit with the O-Note system. And once you have a digitized version of an event model, the idea of zooming in and zooming out, and when you zoom out all the way, all that should be left is really what the CEO and the board is looking at. They have that high level view that we're using kind of right now, right? Maybe that's a layer below. Maybe that's just done once a year. But the top layer is really about where we are in terms of the competitive landscape, in terms of the digital trends or other trends in the industries. If something's being adopted, such as electric cars, if we're in that market, or if things are being more green or environmentally friendly, where our products and services fit in that trend, and how we're putting in the effort in our special sauce to make sure that we give the highest value for our customers. And not only that, but we're not really chasing something down a dead end, and we have it planned for the next year or two as well. Meanwhile, still driving revenue and all those things. So being very transparent all the way down. But then as you zoom in that event model, all of the details that get hooked up to make those events a reality show up, so that, these, we want this this crypto wallet to be used for Walmart purchases. And then, okay, that's cool. If that event is there, we see someone with a receipt that says, you know, they used Litecoin to buy something at Walmart. Wow, that's cool. Well, how does that happen? If you zoom in, you should be able to see all the events that are chained together through various automated processes and other system integrations to make that a reality from beginning to end. So I think that's where we're getting to with a digitized version of the event model.
All in all,
Any
a very fruitful effort in terms.
It was
of,
pretty fast, right? Like how we could just put that stuff on there, right? Like what
Yeah,
was
that
the
was the other thing.
timeline? It was like within 3 hours, right? We had
like we could say even a half day if you wanted to round it. You take a half day and you get a high level, easy to grasp, contextually complete mapping of what needs to happen and what goals you need to achieve for various parts of your year, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, or
but with real information, right? Not
real
around
information
and not around. So I think one of the biggest issues, and this I keep saying that, I think that people save these concepts at an abstraction level because it's easier to understand saying this is a receipt without looking at the details. I think the big difference is that we're looking at actual information. So really easy to map to KPIs that people always use in business, right? So can you actually put that against how your performance is, like key performance indicators that you have? Well, if you have abstractions, you have another layer of mapping. So these KPIs can be gamed. But with an event model, you're using information and evidence from the planning stage already. So that should be able to be vetted a lot more easily. Right. Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to make that clear distinction.
I agree. I just, for me, what made it attractive for me beyond the ease and the speed of which we were able to accomplish it was just the organization. Talking about actors being delineated through their swim lanes that affect certain outcomes over time, the events that need to occur in order for your plan to execute. It just gives clear boundaries as to, I don't know quite how to say this, but almost like your different domains, like inventory, item, you have different actors for different kinds of things that you might want to accomplish, like various clients, various sales-driven, I don't want to say domains, but all the key aspects, all the drivers of your business, those become your swim lanes, those become your actors. It's clear what belongs to what, right? In a sense, it's almost like your security boundaries. For me, it just made it easier to see, and I like a holistic view of things, and that's what you get.
Yeah, I like it too. So, do we want to jump back into some technical stuff in terms of like we already touched on some of the funding that's coming into a lot of these event-driven architectures and products and services. Axon, of course, getting €6 million fundraising done and approved, which is great. That's really, right now we have a situation where the incoming tide floats all boats. So any success in anyone doing event driven products or services is really means success for anyone else in the same space right now, which is wonderful to see. We also had event store DB get funding. I forget. I think it's private, so I don't know if I'm not sure how much they got, but I know that they had some funding. They certainly have been added a lot more marketing and other things that I think was missing from that very pure system for doing event sourcing in a very pure way. Obviously, Greg Young started the company long ago, and it's one of the most mature event stores that give you some of those guarantees that you're looking for, such as global ordering and fine-grained streams that a lot of the other products don't pass. But anyway, that depending on your needs, you may or may not need that. But it's great to see those two. I can't remember what else got funding. Obviously, Bobby's company putting all their eggs in the event modeling basket, which is great because it's great technique that I think people are liking. So it's really good to see, and looking forward to more funding for that company, and moving that forward. And of course, I'm looking forward to a lot of the funding for all the projects that we take on with a Y Combinator model, for making sure that people have shares of these wonderful companies that are taking forging ahead of the pack out there, and not just throwing money at problems, that they're doing it through a responsible treatment of the information systems, and have the traceability in there and all that. So yeah, I'm not sure what other good examples we have of those advancements in event sourcing. I know that there's a lot of frameworks out there now. I mean, which is great. Always good to see that.
Well, drives innovation for sure.
Yeah.
I have a feeling
Now,
Event Store got some, I don't know if you said they got some private funding, but now that their cloud implementations are available.
oh, right, on Azure, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
on all
they're
three,
having
the big guys, AWS, GCP, and Azure. And it's just, I wish this was around 6 months ago,
Yeah.
because I tried to set up a cluster of three, like a 3-node cluster with Event Store on Azure.
Yeah.
It took like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty sweet. That's a little pricey, but that's probably because they're spooling up the machines and they're handling it for you. You got to pay for that hardware, but it's interesting how the prices vary actually too between AWS. You can spool up a single node instance for $8 a month or something like that, and then on Azure I think it starts at 44.
Right, but that checks off a lot of other boxes for you, because you have Azure instrumented, and as you know, that can be quite costly, right? To have someone do it manually.
Especially the companies that really want to do everything, IAC infrastructure as code. This helps you with that part, especially at least configuring the VMs to be running, or whatever they have this running on. I'm guessing it's just VMs, but
right.
And that's we bringing them a lot more revenue, because they can automate this for clients. I see why they'd get a big bunch of funding.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Why the big price difference between AWS and Azure?
I'm not sure. Like when you look at the price of machines, just the VMs themselves, there's a big price difference.
Like, is there more infrastructure needed on Azure for Event Store to work natively, like in a cloud-based solution, or is it just a consequence of their cost structure?
Well, what I've seen is we set it up on Azure previously through the Azure Resource Manager templates, or the ARM templates.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure you have to set up. It's not just your VM. You have the network and
yeah,
all the ports, they have to be configured and all this stuff. Plus you have to, you can log into the machine yourself and install everything, but to do it through a script, there's that extra step of getting that all right. But the VMs themselves, there's a big price difference between just AWS and Azure. You can find a machine on AWS for $4 a month.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to use that for production for sure, but it's like good for development.
That's nice to have, yeah.
Azure, the cheapest you can find is probably, I think it's 3 times that, something like that, for a similar machine. Probably comes down to that.
I wonder if you get more.
I do have to add or disclose, I do work for AWS, and all my event source systems are built on serverless compute. So I personally prefer Lambda functions as the compute. And this works really great with CQS and event source systems, really.
Mm-hmm.
Works really well, last 4.5 years or so.
We've been using the Azure functions for the same sort of idea. And yeah, it's just amazing how it can scale up and keep costs down. A lot of the people that we talk to, they don't really believe it. That, if you're
but also the polyglot approach, in that you can have some functions written in one language versus another. Like Tim's been doing some Kotlin stuff. We haven't heard anything from Tim. I don't know if he's still around, but
yeah.
I think he might be busy with something. But yeah, Tim's been diving in for Kotlin to to look at how
Hey.
those things are.
Hey, what about Python?
Python too. Yeah, sorry. No,
Oh,
Rob, but you already knew Python. This is, Tim wanted to go into Kotlin because it's a great initiative for server side and other things, but from our friends at JetBrains, pushing that forward, which is really, really good. And they're doing some non-JVM work to bring that as a language itself all over the place. So that's really good. But yeah, Python too, Rob. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten about Python. Yeah, Rob's done Python for our workshops so that you can use that. But Thomas, I think, the functional ability allows you to have that polyglot approach a lot more easily accessible, which I think is sadly understated because so many companies hire on your tech stack, and while someone might have some really good experience in your domain, they don't get the job because they're not a .NET developer or something. So I don't know, Thomas, if you have the same experience.
Yeah, I every time I engage with customers, the first thing I start out is with the business side. And I have to really put the brakes on everybody else in the team saying, I know we have a lot of services that we're offering, but that's implementation detail, right? We can get to that fairly easy. That's the easy part, honestly. All the close to 300 services that we have, right? But when it comes to, first, let's concentrate on a domain, a context map. What are we trying to accomplish? And then the transition from even event modeling, event sourcing, DDD, it's fairly easy then to jump, especially when we have a nice, beautiful list of events. And then I have now actually a very natural fit to this eventual consistency concepts that we have in the cloud. The event-based idea that the event idea itself is, for some people, huge topics. Instead of thinking asset, I have to think in events now. I've seen a lot of folks having, hard times even grasping that concept. But then when you go through these
unlearning, right? They have to unlearn their previous,
And having these workshops with customers to understand, yes, we need to think in business events first.
Yeah.
Then a transition into an event-based solution like Lambdas, for example, where it really is dependent on triggers and events, technical system triggers. But now we are putting the domain events on top of it. And it's a really nice natural fit now. And I think with serverless compute, I think this is, it makes this really exciting to build these solutions now.
Yeah, it really is. I always thought that it's the easiest way to, it's been 12 years since I started doing event sourcing, at least maybe I think it's going on to 13 years. It's 2008, it's 2021 already. And I just didn't realize why I liked it. And I found that just that eventual consistency has this other aspect that's quite positive in that you then have license to delay as in Yagni for what you're going to do with that information later. Where if I was to do a new Ruby, like a Rails new kind of project, I have to think of all the projections right away. I have to think about where that information is going to go into which tables and all that. So it actually is slower to start. Whereas if I start thinking with event sourcing, I know that the most responsible thing for me to do is just to write down the fact, and that I know that that's accurate. And there's not a lot more design or planning around the fact that I stored, this event. Later on, I can make a projection to interpret it in the way that I will need it at some other, workflow step down the line. So it's, and so it always catches me. I've been lucky enough to swim in this kind of thinking for 13 years, but you're right. If you're coming from the world where you always must think of any information that you add as input into the system, you must right there and then validate that it's going to all the right places in the right shape and the right transformations. That's where the imposter syndrome comes from too, right? I'm not sure if you have the same experience, Thomas.
Yeah, people get caught up so quickly in the technology, security in general,
right?
Which are important, but it's really hard to put the brakes on many times. And like you said, so I think education is very important. I think this podcast could help maybe educate just basic concepts, basic foundational things like what is actually an event? What does that actually mean, depending who's looking at it? Is it a technical person? Is it a business person? As soon as you look at that, like who's looking at this concept and explaining then, well, there's no such thing as real time. There's always a delay, but we can tell you how old it is. Would that help you? How do I negotiate when I have an event source system? The question, well, what about eventual consistencies on my read model side? I hear this all the time. Like, well, I have either, say, a DynamoDB table, or I have a SQL persistence, MySQL, or whatever, what have you, right? The question comes, well, but I needed to have it right away. It has to be ACID compliant. And then these discussions start. Well, do you know the purpose of a read model or read models?
Yeah.
Well, you can have 10 different read models now with polyglot persistence, right? But let me tell you the business advantages, that you don't have to have all the requirements right now in order to look at your data. So I can add a second or third or fourth read model as we discover requirements, even while we develop and build the system. And 2 years from now, you come up with a new idea. Fantastic. Here's your guarantee, because here's your event source system. Here's your source of truth. Now I can tell the business, do you see the advantage? Do you see how I can have this?
I always found that it's easier to talk to business people about event sourcing because it's the way humans think, as I said earlier, right? And so
and
it's
that's the
always
key.
the
I think
technical side, right?
Yeah, that's the key. That's why I like to start out with the business first, because once they understand it and they champion this, then you have somewhat of a pressure, so to speak, to the technical folks, but also then they have sometimes the willingness to learn something new.
Right.
And saying, yeah, this is really interesting. What do you mean I didn't lose any information? That's great.
Yeah, I think it's also a good bridge between the technical people and the business people, because they're, I think I tweeted, when was this, about, pair programming and mob programming. It still kind of has that, even if you try to inject someone like a product owner in there, it still is a very technical kind of elitist approach to building systems. But I think what we're after is really that collaboration. And so as long as we can always collaborate, and understand our information system, that's where we do that. So we're talking about, I kind of say that instead of pair programming, let's look further past these good things and look at maybe mob designing instead. And maybe the design is the language that is that bridge between the two camps. And it's enough to actually have something that will get you what you want as an organization, right? So look at the benefits of pair programming, being, a person that writes the test and the second person writes the implementation. You have this exchange that is really nice to have a really good minimalist, kind of a pure approach. Just get this nice kind of dance going together. But with mob designing, maybe that's going to be the better way of describing event modeling. Maybe we'll rebrand it to mob designing. I don't know. The word mob lately is not a good one to use, but we'll probably think of something else. But just like with mob programming, why leave it at 2? Why should Rob and Steve be the only 2 that talk about that one feature and how to implement it? Right. The idea is that mob programming is like, let's have all the people in the room and everyone understands how that feature works. Well, what about the design of the whole system? Let's do mob designing, including the code, including the requirements all together. And so, and I think events are key to that, because I think you need something that's more natural to human beings and is not like a technical caveat. Right. Is that what you're getting at? Sort of.
Yeah, sort of. I think, like, when music brings people together, I think the events can bring people together between business and technical folks.
That's
I think
true.
that's the key.
Or like sport, like soccer, right? There's a famous, during the times of the Gulf War and things like that, the Middle East and U.S. bad relations and all that. There was when people were at a soccer match, all those things were forgotten. And so maybe we want this to be this kind of equalizer of something that's quite human, like playing a game, a sports thing, that all of a sudden all the differences are forgotten. And I think with these collaborative approaches, you get that in design by having people more looking at a problem together rather than trying to argue about the problem with each other. Maybe that's a better way of looking at it.
Yep.
Hey, Thomas, I had a question for you. Have you had the opportunity at Amazon to use event modeling?
Yes, I
I'm not
did,
sure.
and I actually I'm one of those few people. I have to say I've been pushing very heavily the idea of even event sourcing, event storming, event modeling. To me, event modeling is like the next step when you really want to, I guess, go the next level higher, more deeper, more richer. If you do event sourcing, I mean, not event storming workshops that I've held, either big picture or a more detailed one, both of them work depending who the audience is. And I've, basically internally, I've been a big proponent of this whole idea because we have all these wonderful services on the far end of it, on the implementation side, but how do I tell our customers, no matter what the technical implementation is, even if I say, well, you can do hexagon type architecture, it's independent from cloud providers, actually with all three of them could work, use the adapter concept, all these kind of cool things you can build, but still getting the executives to understand, well, what's the value proposition if I have this event source system? So now I can usually sell the idea of these business capabilities of an event source system, such as, well, you have this wonderful, perfect audit log. I don't have to lose information. I can time travel.
Maintenance.
I can do projections of informations that I didn't even know existed because one customer couldn't qualify for this product. But in the past, with your SQL database or SQL persistence concepts, you lost the opportunity to see why the customer didn't qualify, right? If you have some kind of qualifications process in one example. But with an event source system, I can say, well, I'm going to store this decision, customer did not qualify, and why. Here's my information. Now, one of my read models can be just for that purpose to do drill down further analysis, right, and do some kind of marketing. You can do all kinds of things. And so when you open up, I think, the business opportunities, then people get more excited on both ends. On the technical side, of course, the nasty impedance mismatch falls away. All these wonderful things that we had to battle with in the last 20, 30 years. So many technical advantages. I can see business capabilities and I can see technical advantages. But then there's also the scary part of, if I show a diagram to a customer that's an event source system, it's a bit scary, honestly, because there's a lot of components, especially in the serverless environment. Initially, when you look at it, there's a whole bunch of stuff in it, right? And so we still have room to improve and to simplify on the implementation on the technical side, because I think that the business side will get it easier than the technical side. I have probably more hurdles with technical folks to understand these basic foundational concepts. What is an event? Because a lot of them, honestly, in enterprises, they have been thinking asset for decades. Asset this, asset that, transactions, everything has to be perfect at the same time. You have to break that out of them, right? And so that's, to me, is sometimes challenging.
I think that whole unlearning old patterns or habits.
Sorry, Steve. No, I just wanted to follow up because we're talking about business opportunities that event modeling can open up, and areas on the technical side that allow for implementation to be easier. But there's also the support side. We have an event store. We have the truth. It yields the opportunity to fix bugs. When I talk about support, I'm talking about maintenance of software. 80% of the time you're maintaining software, and I'm guessing 20% of the time you're building new software, a ratio along those lines. Oftentimes in a system that's current state or doesn't preserve the history of, or your truth, you have to do a lot of debugging. You have to do a lot of things that allow you to find and seek the truth, and you have to rely on the memory of others, which is a terrible thing to do since our memories don't really work that perfectly. In an event source system, you can build a harness relatively easily and pipe those events in to your software base, your code, and you can see exactly what happened. You can find a bug instead of days, maybe hours or even minutes. That's a huge cost to get overlooked. Support always gets overlooked, but it's a massive cost. It's a business opportunity because it affects your bottom line. People can spend more time doing more interesting things.
Yeah, it's a responsible way to do that, and I go back to the fact that it's just the history of computing. It's I go back to that disparity between the transistor being a leap of of couple of levels of magnitude in terms of processing of information. That same leap did not happen for storage of information, and that created this why we look at digital information differently than we did when we were using forms on pen and paper and carbon copies and filing cabinets, or any other information. And you have to really analyze that difference as to say, well, why? What is the advantage of doing one versus the other? And you can see there are technical limitations as to why we were forced to use one versus the other before. But now that's changed. However, we had the first, formative years of dealing with digitized information systems. Those patterns were set for over 50 years, and they're hard to get out of. There's a lot of tooling, quite mature tooling, to look at problems that way. And I always say it's the same thing as, like, there are some really, really high quality, horse and buggies, like the buggies for horses, in the early 19th or 20th century, right? They're really top of the line. They were made of light materials, and so the horse wouldn't get tired. But it doesn't matter how good that buggy is. The car's just faster, and you don't need to feed a horse anymore, and you don't need to get a new horse or have a stable for it. Those are entirely different concepts, right? What made a buggy good is not what's going to make a car good necessarily, right? So yeah, lots of analogies to draw, like how the technical limitations of the world shape how we do something. So yeah, but back to Justin's point, having that traceability built in, right? There's nothing that takes longer than 4 hours to see why that bug occurred. You have a trail of exactly what state the system was in at each point. It's having a reliable log, and having log statements in your code is not the same thing. There's bugs in that. There's
You got to read that.
you got to first of all, you got to read that. You gotta you
wanna
gotta
do.
also trust that you have, are you going to repeat all the information into the logs? Usually it's maybe just maybe it's too much information because it's capturing the value of each variable at every single method call, and it's like, oh my god, that's just like a lot. I mean, it's
You're
good that
relying
it's
on
there,
people's
but
logging judgment. Basically, what did they put into the log, as opposed to an
yeah.
actual event that contains your source of truth, the things that actually affect code execution. A log doesn't do that.
Yeah. So we'll be going in this podcast. We'll be going in all of these into all of these concepts, and we're going to have a form that people can fill out on the web page that's going to be up, and operational, and all the other aspects of this podcast, where people can put in their suggestions of what they would like to cover. And we'll try to curate that, like, what is an event from a business perspective versus a technical perspective. We already had that suggested by Thomas, and so yeah, I'm quite excited about this. I think we were already doing this as part of the meetup, and the meetup was in person, and it became virtual, and then sort of became more like a podcast or a virtual sort of discussion. And then we decided to stream it, and I'm like, well, it's kind of looking like a podcast. So we're going to keep the meetup to have, which will be more like a meetup. But also we've decided to split that in half because it was being done twice a week. So one of those days, which used to be Tuesday, now will be a Monday. It's a better day for a podcast. Will be in the form of a podcast, and it'll have a separate channel. It'll be in this kind of format where we have discussions and we bring guests and we discuss specific things in this format, and publish it on all the podcasting platforms so that you can catch up every week. Have a couple of hours, an hour to a couple of hours, listening to different topics on your way to work, on your commute, or when you're not on your way to work because it's still COVID, but when you're having your morning coffee or your trying to fall asleep with some interesting concepts in your head, then you can, have this podcast in your ears and listen to it. It'll have a visual version, obviously, on YouTube, and we're going to try and be as descriptive as possible for the audio. And then, of course, in the show notes, provide the links to the topics covered as best as we can. And hopefully, after 52 episodes after the year, we'll have a really good book of material and useful information for people to go into older episodes and re-listen to some of these things. So again, your suggestions will have a place to be heard. Obviously, you can do comments on the meetup, actual meetup, for if you want to get involved, want to be here alongside with Rob and Steve and others. You're more than welcome to, and then you can also suggest if you want to be a guest. If you're working for Axon, we'll probably have the Axon guys here. We're probably going to have Vaughn again. We're probably going to have a few others that are in the event-driven systems to see if Alberto wants to join us to talk about, the new things he added to event storming as well, and really give you a good lay of the land of the event-driven, the stream-based type of information processing that we have. Obviously, message-based types of architectures. A lot of the cloud stuff that's happening now, of course, and as of last week, we're going to be looking at some decentralization stuff, right? We had Parler and others being booted off of AWS, so they have to be in a decentralized model. One of our clients is a decentralized social networking platform, and so we can explore how that is changing the way that information on Ledger is allowing that to scale, which is really cool. So I'm sure we're going to have the CEO of that company talk about why the decentralization is needed and how ledger-based architectures help that along. Of course, we have some tooling that's being built around that. The biggest thing being ONote, and so Bobby will probably have that. And if you haven't caught the Twit, I think it's Twit blog, the Twit podcast, I'll leave a link in the show notes. But Bobby had a really cool
follow and a listen. He's a great speaker.
Yeah, Bobby's wonderful, and and he's been he's very articulate, much I would say more articulate than me. So it's always nice to hear from him. And so the Twit podcast. So it's twit.tv. He did an episode last week. It just aired, I think, yesterday or the day before. And it's wonderful. He talks about just how he used event modeling and event-driven approaches to scale things out at Capital One, a really large bank. So I encourage you to listen to that podcast as well. Really lots to learn from Bobby there, and also how to talk about it and what words to use, and listen to how he speaks about systems. It's quite eloquent, and so highly recommend Bobby Calderwood on the Twit podcast. So we'll always be giving out shout outs to other podcasts on here, so that people can also get, grow their podcast channel list to have lots of different meaningful podcasts that they can have at their disposal to listen to. And then, of course, explaining these things, like we said, event, what are events? How do you explain them? And then how does this actually help people that are brand new? So I think Scott Hanselman had a really interesting, he's got a podcast too as well, but he had a really interesting YouTube episode about how not to become overwhelmed. People starting to do programming, or they switch to a new approach like event driven. There's this sense of being overwhelmed. And I remember being overwhelmed at the beginning at trying to do CQRS and event sourcing and thinking it's all about the infrastructure. Oh, I need to store my events. And back then there was no projects for storing your events. It was, you're doing it yourself. You're going to have to serialize, and back then it was to XML, not JSON. So I was serializing my objects to XML and storing them as files, and then maintaining my own index. But by then I was familiar with Git and its .git folder structure and the referential integrity, and when do you write the last reference and all those things so you can keep its integrity. And those are really good learning things. So this idea about being overwhelmed is very common because there's so much tooling. There's so much in tech these days. There's just millions of things. And if you're new to the industry, to programming, or new to an approach, you need to get some guidance. and find a mindset that will allow you to focus and continue. So there is a recording on the event driven YouTube channel, which is the one for the meetup. This is actually going to be first aired on that channel, and then it's going to get moved to the proper podcast channel. But there, the interview with we talk about that podcast episode that Scott Hanselman had, and how you can use event-driven thinking to get that guidance so that you're not overwhelmed. And for a lot of times, that's us looking at the event model and just following the line. It's like, what's the next thing I do? Oh, I make sure that we display this HTML page, and then when they press that button on that page, what happens next? Oh, we follow the line here, and how many permutations of data is there on that? Oh, we have these cases down here explained. So we can show how not to get overwhelmed using some of these approaches when you're doing event sourcing or not. I mean, you can still use that same event-driven approach for traditional architectures. What happens in that case, obviously, is you really have a good way of showing all the coupling that your large monolithic, not monolithic, but canonical data model of how all the data is supposed to be always denormalized. And when updates blast away old data, you can see that illustrated, and at least you have a map to go and find where the coupling is going to cause you problems, or at least know where to look. So, event sourcing is great because you don't have those problems, but when that's not an option, at least an event model is going to show you where the state changed from X to Y, and where you might need to find a backup of that data and restore a specific version of the database, or for next time which table might need a associated history table because of the recurring problems there. So those kinds of interesting things can also work for traditional systems, and that's what we're going to do. So I think we're going to keep this episode a little bit short. We're going to be announcing a lot about how to get a hold of us, and give us suggestions for topics you want to see covered. If you want to be a guest on the show, where to who to contact, and all that, and then if you want to participate in any other way, we're going to have all that. And then of course we can finish off with just saying that the guys here are working at the Adaptec group, doing only event sourced systems primarily, teaching how to do this, teaching concepts in the cloud, how to do this in various languages. So connect with us if you have people that need training. Connect with us if you need your projects to move faster ahead with these types of approaches. We're happy to take a portion of your work and give you working software to use as a blueprint for your own internal projects. If you're a startup and don't know where to start at all, we're happy to help you there as well and give you a working system that's going to scale from the beginning, and that's going to continue to be a good base to build upon once your company starts to get traction and all of that. So we have all of these avenues opening up. Check our website, adaptecgroup.com, where we have all of these enumerated and how you can get involved. So the podcast is always going to be sponsored by Adaptec, obviously, and I'm going to continue to be the host. Hopefully we're going to start to expand, and we're going to get co-hosts and other aspects worked into this, get panels and get special events going. So looking forward to many episodes this year with lots of interesting stuff. Any last words from the gallery here to finish the podcast on? Anything I forgot, first of all? I'm going off the top of my head, making the best notes I can, but anything else I forgot to mention? No? Steve is saying no.
That was a good first podcast.
Yeah, it's fun. Podcasting is great. I'm going to try and get my radio voice, even better. You hear Bobby talking, you hear, the last podcast he was on. That guy sounds like a radio DJ. It's like he's got the inflections and it's talking like this and that, and I'll get there one day instead of my mumbling and ums and ahs. So it takes me a long time. That's not what I'm really good at, but I'll learn eventually. So thank you for listening.
There are a couple other ideas that I've been playing around with. One of them, the first one is the concept of nano-services, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, but in the concept of that big question, how big is a microservice supposed to be, or how small is it supposed to be? Well, if you use domain-driven design, you already know the root aggregates is enforcing the consistent transactional boundaries, right? And so I've been playing around with the idea of, well, why can't I have a root aggregate as a nano service that enforces the boundary, and based on the concept of the Erlang programming language and the actor model. So if you take that into a serverless environment, because you can cookie cutter these now, so the concept of using the root aggregate as its own boundary as a nano service, but use the inbox and outbox concept of the actor model and the Erlang programming language. In the Erlang programming language, it was based on really on a single CPU process idea. But if you now scale this out into a cloud environment, you can do this in a massive scale, right? You have many root aggregates now. Think about the possibilities that you can have. So that's an idea that I've been playing around with. The other one was what Greg Young mentioned several years ago about, which I find very fascinating. Why couldn't I have an event store on each device, each client? That means your domain model is on your each device, right? Because then there's two questions I can remove. Well, I don't have a central control anymore, which I don't need, which I don't trust. I'll rather trust what I have locally in my possession.
That's right.
The concept of commands and queuing them up, have my intelligence locally, sounds really fascinating to me, because especially the concept that it's not centrally managed. And the performance to a degree, right? The advantages. So I think those two topics are, for me, going to be very interesting this year.
Well, definitely the decentralization with discussion with many one company and as it was called Pure Social is exactly that. And we already discussed this concept quite a bit about, like, I don't trust the honeypot to have my information. I want to have a model that's reversed, where the website that I'm going to actually has no information about me. It stores nothing. I'm not even encrypted. And my ledger of what I did is actually stored in cookies just on the client side. And every time that I interact with the website for any services that it provides, then I send whatever projections or use any local projections to send that information back and forth, and just have it really as a function that's in the cloud that I'm using. But the state is purely on my side. So that would be interesting to actually build some stuff like that. And I was talking to Von Vernon. They have a couple of projects that I sort of started as skunkworks to basically use. There's indexed DB and local store in HTML5 that's supported, right? And even earlier, cookies being the very early example of this, of course. But think about that concept of, like, I don't actually trust any company to put my personal information into that honeypot that can get attacked or be at the whim of some laws that, where those servers are hosted, for example. So interesting concepts. I mean, I'm sure you'd be interested in hearing about that and doing doing some experiments with those types of approaches. Of course, with being able to model and design your system in events, you can say which events you have to have on the server side, but at least you can start to draw a line of, like, well, I'm not comfortable with this stuff being on their servers. And you can see how, two different swim lanes of events have to interact for you to actually get something done and find value out of that type of design. So for sure. And then, of course, the nano services, it's kind of what you get with serverless anyway, right? I mean, we've discussed already on the meetup, how aggregates themselves are already kind of bulky, because if you want to cancel an order, do you really need to know about the other events that happened in it? If the business rule is pretty simple, allow an order to be canceled no matter what state it's in, then the only event that you really care about is whether that order exists or not. Or even then, you don't care. You might just fail silently. But so there, for that aggregate, do you need to hydrate? Do you need to know anything else? So now you can look at a functional approach for the events that comprise that stream, and say that I don't need to fetch anything except whether that, whether it exists, whether there's any events in that stream at all, in order for me to process the cancel order command, right? I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at with Nano, but I think we can keep
Yeah,
diving into that, the how finely the information can be chopped up, and the functionality be chopped up and still make sense overall, right?
Yeah, you can think of it as the Nano service would be completely controlled by, not controlled, but the boundaries by this single root aggregate. You might have some aggregates part of it, but everything around it, like the inbox, the outbox concepts, right, for resiliencies, message communication between the different Nano services, because this single root aggregate does not care, should not care about all the other ones I might have. I might have dozens of other ones, or hundreds even, right? But the fact that they're already out of my boundary is really irrelevant to process the single command coming in, this message coming into my inbox. For resiliency's sake, right? I should be able to buffer in and out. And the only concern I have now within this Nano service is my speak to the hand rules, right? You're passing through my rules. You either fail or you succeed. And if there's an exception, I know how to handle it, right? Just like the concept of Erlang had. And so with this infrastructure as code, I can make these more like cookie cutter, right? I can now have this template, this concept of these individual root aggregates in my infrastructure in a cloud environment, for example. But now I can concentrate, well, what does this root aggregate supposed to do? If I look at my event storming session I had, or event modeling session, I can see, well, here's what I have inside this DDD root aggregate, right? And now I can answer the question, well, how big is it supposed to be? Well, exactly. It's right here. It's a single root aggregate.
Yeah.
It makes it somewhat simpler
on
one hand, but it makes it a very, somewhat more complex, right? If you have many of these now, many tiny Nano services, but infrastructure as code will help you here a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're the same pattern over and over again.
Exactly.
That's where you make it. That's where you make the infrastructure boring, and you make the business interesting. It's always been the other way around, I find, for a long time, which is a big problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it's almost been 2 hours since we started. So we're gonna cut it off here. And any other suggestions, comments on the YouTube channel? Again, the meetup comments there are great. We're gonna open up a couple of lines of email to have that channel open as well. And we're looking forward to some fun times on the podcast. I'm gonna work on some intro music that's a little bit quieter than the other intro music I had. I think we had some feedback on that, so we're gonna have maybe if you have if you're a student that's doing art and digital art and you want to provide some cool animations about event-driven stuff because you're using storyboards for your art, feel free. Maybe we'll contract you out to do some work for a really cool intro. Same with musicians. If you have some really cool music you want to have featured, we'll pay for it as well. So not gonna just give you the excuse of but think of your exposure that we're giving you. We'll give you some money for that work, and hopefully that'll be something that's used on that. I came up with the designs myself here. I know I got to focus on a lot of stuff. I'd love to do all of this myself. We'll do a few things myself for the styling and all the rest, but it would be nice to get some contributions from dedicated artists to give the polish to the podcast that it needs. And so likewise with the website, we're going to use some templates that are available out there and use those for now. But again, anyone else that's interested in helping out on that aspect of the design and the implementation, we want to keep it as a static site. We don't want any WordPress stuff, but that's the only caveat. And other than that, we'll look forward to seeing everyone back on Monday when the first official episode 1 airs. Not gonna reveal what the topic is yet or if there's a guest, but stay tuned. Monday 10:30 Pacific Standard Time is when you can listen to it live. Recordings will be available on the Event Driven podcast on YouTube and any other podcast platform that you use. So again, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you on Monday. Excited to start this year.